defend the definite, winning the war of words, and winning the culture wars. So years and years ago, long before I became a Catholic, or indeed a Christian, I had a friend who was a political philosopher, and we'd be discussing politics, because in those days I thought you could put the world right with politics. I've long since learned that that's not the case. But we would talk about various political terms, and he'd say you have to define your terms before you use them. And that used to irritate me because I was young and headless and heedless, I just wanted to get on with the argument, right? But I realise now that this is essential, that we have to know the meanings of the words that we're using. If we don't, then we won't be able to persuade other people what we're trying to say, and also we will be confused by the way other people use the words. So the first thing we have to realise is there's a power in words, a real power. And we don't realise it. I also learned this from Tolkien, from his lecture on fairy stories. If I were to say that I have the power to cast a spell on you, and you believed it, you'd be concerned, right? Because, magicians cast spells. But what we don't realise is that the word spell applies to a word. That to spell a word is to cast a spell. And we need to actually take things right back to the very beginning, which is to God. That searching for God, the Greeks, using the power of reason, came to some sort of understanding, first of all, that the divine has to be coherent and not anarchic. At the heart of reality is not discord and anarchy, but some sort of order and harmony. And from this they came to an understanding of what they call the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. Now, I believe, and I try to explain, I'm not going to go on about this for too long here because it's not the main part of the talk, that when Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he is saying, I am the good, the true, and the beautiful. In other words, what the Greeks were looking for as the essence of the divine, you are seeing in me incarnate. The good, the true, and the beautiful are triune, they're inseparable, they are some sense of reflection of the Trinity. And when Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he's saying, I am the way of goodness, I am the truth of reason, and I am the life of beauty. Very, very briefly, obviously the way of goodness is love, virtue. Virtue is basically love in action. To love, in a Christian understanding of the word, we'll talk about this a little bit later perhaps, is rational. Let's define our terms. The word love. The modern world thinks love is an emotion. It's a feeling, which means it's inherently irrational. But for the Christian, commanded by Christ to love, it's a rational choice. We freely choose to sacrifice ourselves for others. It's a rational choice to lay down our lives for the other. So the goodness of Christ is that I am the way. The goodness of Christ is love. The true is reason, ratio, logos, God as logos. So God as love, God as logos, God as where the root of all reason, from where all reason flows and to which all correct use of reason flows back, the logos. And then the way of beauty, the beauty is the life in things, okay? So life is not just biological life. No, that when God turns nothing into something, he brings the cosmos to life, and that includes the stars in the sky. Beauty is the life in something. If a sunset is beautiful, if we don't see it, it's not because it's not beautiful, it's because we can't see it, maybe because we're blind. But for the beauty to be seen, the beholder has to have a life in them, all right? And an ability to enjoy that beauty. It's a relationship between the beholder and the thing beheld. The beholder does not make the beauty, right? It's not beauty because I believe it's to be beautiful. It's beautiful anyway, whether I see it or not. Or it's not beautiful anyway. But Anyway, I don't want to go on too much of that, but the key thing here is the logos, right? Reason, the true. And the true is always beautiful and good, right? Inseparable. So words need to be used in a way that it's authentically rational, which means if it's authentically in accordance with the true, it will also be good and beautiful. So the power of words, the power of allegory, the power of signs. Saint Augustine, in his book De Doctrina Christiana, Christian Doctrine, says that we perceive reality through signs. And he says there are two types of signs. There are natural signs and conventional signs. A natural sign, an example of a natural sign would be an animal sign. So an animal track. So if you see a certain imprint in the mud, literally that is just an indentation in the dirt, right? That's what it is. But you read something else into that. You read because of the shape of that indentation, the creature that made it, even though you can't see it, and the direction the creature was moving in, even though it's not there any longer, and perhaps how long ago, if you're very good at reading the signs. If you don't have that language, you have no idea what creature had passed through. But then we have conventional signs, which are man-made signs. And the most commonly used man-made signs are words. And words are powerful because words are the means by which we communicate reality. First of all to ourselves, and then to others. And of course, if we can't communicate reality to ourselves, we can't communicate it to others. This is the power of words. So for instance, if I made a monosyllabic grunt, dog, and you don't read the signs, in other words, speak English, you will not have any idea what I'm saying. I'll just be making meaningless noises. But if you read the sign, I've cast a spell on you. I've made a monosyllabic grunt, dog, and simultaneously all of you are bringing to your minds a four-legged canine. Might be different species of four-legged canine, but nonetheless, four-legged canine. So this is the power of words. First of all, to communicate reality to ourselves. We see a four-legged canine. In order to be able to make sense of what that is, we have to have a sign in our minds to communicate that to ourselves, and then we can communicate that to others. So St. Augustine makes it, this is, we can't even think physically. This is, by the way, this puts an end to all understandings of purely philosophical materialism, atheism. We can't even communicate reality to each other without being transcendental, without using metaphysical science. Something which itself is not the thing itself. So now I want to get into some famous questions in order to defend the definite, to give definite answers. Perhaps the most famous question ever asked, certainly one of the most important questions ever asked, was asked in Latin. Quid est veritas? We all know who said that? Pontius Pilate. Okay, he says it of Jesus Christ, of course. But that question is dependent, first of all, on how we ask it. We can ask it as quid est veritas, as a question that needs to be not just asked, but answered. Or at the very least, someone like Socrates, it should prompt further questions that need to be answered. It should set us in motion towards something which we call the truth. But the modern world asks the question, quid est veritas? What is truth? That the truth either doesn't exist, which makes the question meaningless, or it's unattainable and unknowable, which also makes the question meaningless. So obviously this question, quid est veritas, depends very much on how we ask it. And is it unknowable? Well, it's not, because the question was actually answered. It was answered directly. by the man to which it was asked, to whom it was asked. So when Pontius Pilate said Quid Veritas, Jesus Christ didn't give him the answer, but he did give his disciples the answer. I am the way, the truth, and the life. That the way that we know the truth on a deeper level is because it's been revealed to us. That the Greeks knew reality using reason as much as they could possibly know. And they came quite a long way. So that basically it needs to be monotheistic. You can't have at the heart of reality loads of squabbling gods. And somehow or other, whatever that is good, true, and beautiful. And somehow or other, you can't separate goodness, truth, and beauty. They got that far. But they couldn't get any further. Unless God himself chooses to reveal himself to us. Which he does. In his life and in his words. When he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, it means the question of Quid Veritas has been asked, not just asked, but answered. Jesus Christ is the truth. All right, let's ask another very, very axiomatic question we have to get right. Who is man? Well, that question was actually answered by the person who asked the first question. Pontius Pilate. Ecce homo. Behold the man. The perfect man has been revealed to us. The person who is the truth is also the perfect man, Jesus Christ. And we are called to become like him. And the more like him we become, the more fully, truly human we become. The more we deviate from that perfect man, the less truly human we become. Of course, there's a problem, because we can't possibly be as perfect as Jesus Christ, not least because he's also God as well as being man, and we can never be that. But we are shown perfection, and every step in that direction is a step in the right direction. Even though we'll never be as truly human in the perfect sense as Jesus Christ is, every time we make progress in the life of virtue, truth, and beauty, that we are becoming more fully human. All right, but we're going to change that question a little bit, because who is man? Ecce homo, behold the man. Who are we? Now, obviously, there's a gap between the perfect man and the very imperfect people we are. But the answer to that really is ecce homo. Because the man that's revealed to us when Pontius Pilate says that, is a man who's been scourged, crowned with thorns. He's been abused. That's what we do to Jesus Christ. That's also what we do to ourselves when we do it to Jesus Christ. And when we nail him to the cross, we're nailing ourselves to the cross also. There are two senses in which we are on Golgotha. By nailing Christ to the cross and being nailed either side of him. In other words, we are all going to suffer. Suffering is unavoidable. We will all have crosses to carry, whether we like it or not. Crosses are unavoidable. It's not whether we suffer, but what we do with the suffering. So there's a great novel by a sadly neglected Catholic convert novelist called Maurice Baring, who was a good friend of Chesterton and Belloc. He's actually a best-selling novelist between the two world wars, but sadly not read much these days. But in, I think, his final novel, there's a priest character, and he says, the acceptance of sorrow is the secret of life. When you understand that, you'll understand everything. Not sorrow or suffering, but the acceptance of sorrow or suffering. So either side of Christ are two sinners. They're actually the same in the sense that they are sinners, and because of their sin, they're being crucified. Sinners tend to crucify themselves in this life with their habits. The difference is the good thief realizes he's a sinner, realizes that the perfect man, the good man, is being crucified because of him, and asks for forgiveness and goes to heaven. The other thief hates his suffering, hates his cross, hates everybody else, including the God beside him, blaming everybody except himself for the situation he's in, and demands of God a sign. So, who are we? We're also that scourged man. He's the innocent man who's scourged, even though he's innocent. We're the guilty men who are scourged because we're guilty. So who are we, though? I want to take that deeper, because what we're not, sometimes, you look at, for instance, Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, and he spends a lot of time arguing against himself. He gives the objections to the argument before answering the objections. So he gives the argument, then he gives the objections to the argument, then he gives the answer to the objections. Very methodical mind. So we'll begin by, who we're not. So popular definitions of who we are, but we're actually not. One of the most recent, as it being only 200 years old, is the label we give to ourselves, Homo sapiens. And this is the scientific label that the Enlightenment gave to us. And it's one of the stupidest, most stupid labels you can imagine we could give ourselves. Because, of course, in Latin, sapiens means wise. And if you know anything about the history of humanity, from the beginning to the present, you know that every generation makes the same mistakes as every previous generation, because no generation learns the lessons that the previous generations have taught. You can call that lots of things, but wisdom's not the first word that comes to mind. So we're not Homo sapiens. To be fair to the Enlightenment people, they weren't using their words well. It's a problem. What they really meant was not wise man, but clever man. Because they were not wise enough to know the difference between cleverness and wisdom. Tolkien was clever enough and wise enough. In The Hobbit, the narrator tells us towards the beginning of the story that goblins make many clever things, but no beautiful ones. And he then says it's not unlikely that they are responsible for many of the inventions that plague our own world, especially ingenious devices for killing lots of people at once. So the modern terminology from the 20 years ago would be weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, we're very clever, but cleverness and wisdom are not the same thing. So we're not Homo sapiens. Nor are we, a more modern term for ourselves, Homo economicus. And our only purpose in life is to produce and consume for the market. We're producers and consumers. That's our purpose. We're cogs in the market machine. That reduces who we are to a factor of production. No, we're not Homo economicus. We have to go further back in time to know who we are. We have to go back with two Latin words, or two words together, and one Greek word. So the Greek word is anthropos, where we get the Greek word for man, where we get words like anthropology. And according to Plato, etymologists argue about this, but Plato's good enough authority for me. Anthropos means he who turns upwards, he who looks up. So I sometimes make the definition, the animal grazes, but man gazes. The animal is confined and constrained by instinct. It has its head down in the dirt. It can't look up transcendentally and see things that are good, true and beautiful. It just responds to its appetite, to its instincts. It's a slave of appetite and instinct. We have appetites and instincts, but we are more than that. We look up. So again, you know, we mentioned Plato. There's a philosopher that's even greater than Plato, and that's Samwise Gamgee. And Samwise Gamgee says, one of the darkest moments in the Lord of the Rings, above all shadows rides the sun. It doesn't matter how dark things are, but above all evil, above all darkness, there is a goodness that not just only transcends, but supersedes that. But you can only know that, and you can only see that if you look up. You will not see that above all shadows rise the sun if you don't look up and see the sun. And by the way, in Tolkien's mythology, and I'm not going to go off on the tangent, read the Silmarillion and you'll see, that the light of the sun is a fallen light, a broken light that comes after the fall. The pure light of God is to be found in the Silmarils, right? So what we see is a refracted light, not the pure light that comes from God. So for Tolkien, the light of the sun is not the true light, but it's a reflection or refraction of that true light. It reminds me of words that sonnet poets, good poets, also look up. This is a poet, a sonnet to the sun by the Catholic poet Roy Campbell, and it begins, "Oh, let your shining orb grow dim, of Christ the mirror and the shield, that I may gaze through you to him, see half the miracle revealed." So we're anthropos, we look up in wonder. And ultimately, this is all connected to what I call the five philosophical senses, five metaphysical senses. So we know what our five physical senses are, so I won't enumerate those. But there are also five metaphysical senses which go in order. And this is sort of my trying to sort of distill and communicate from St. Thomas Aquinas. But the five metaphysical senses is that perception of reality begins with the necessity of humility. And I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, because I like controversy. It's fun and dangerous. There's two reasons for liking it. By saying that what's the greatest of the virtues? Love. Okay, we all know St. Paul. Notice the virtues is love. What's the first and the worst of sins? Pride. Okay. What's the technical, philosophical and theological definition of pride in an Augustinian sense? No? Thank you. The absence of humility, right? Because evil has no existence. God does not create evil. So evil is the absence of the good, which God does create. So pride is the absence of humility. So the first and the worst of sins is the absence of humility. Now, I'm not contradicting St. Paul, because to love in the Christian sense is inseparable from humility. To love is encapsulating that great paradox of Christ: the first shall be last and the last shall be first. We have to lose our lives to gain it, and if we try to gain our life, we'll lose it, right? This is a paradox. In other words, that to love is to give ourselves away, to lay down our lives for someone else, to sacrifice ourselves. That's inseparable from humility. Pride is the refusal to do that. So the two are basically inseparable. So the perception of reality begins with humility. If we have humility, the fruit of humility is a sense of gratitude. If we have a sense of gratitude, our eyes are opened in wonder. And it's only after our eyes are opened in wonder that we move to contemplation. And it's only through contemplation we experience what St. Thomas Aquinas calls dilatatio, dilation, the opening of the mind and the soul into the fullness of the real. So if we want to really be open to having the fullness of reality entering into our perception, being able to perceive it, we have to have the humility that leads to gratitude, opens your eyes in wonder, that leads to contemplation, and that's how we get that dilation. Anthropos, he who looks up in wonder and experiences the real. Okay, another understanding of who we are, which is older and much more accurate, is Homo viator, man on a journey, travelling man, man on a quest, man on a pilgrimage. Each of us is on a journey. Our life is a life journey. Our life is a life story, because every journey is also a story. No surprise or coincidence, by the way, that both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are about a journey, which is also a quest. Because the only purpose of life is to take that journey or that pilgrimage, which is a quest for heaven. The only goal of life is to get to heaven, is to be united with God. There is no other purpose. If we fail in that, we are literally miserable losers in that journey, in that pilgrimage. So this understanding, and that's why we need stories, because each of us is a story. We are individual stories that are part of a bigger story. And that bigger story is not just the story of people who happen to be walking around at the same time as us. It's the story of people who have been walking around for thousands of years before us, and will be walking around for goodness knows how many years after us. We're all part of a story. We're Homo viator, man on a journey. But the third thing we are is Homo superbus, proud man, a Latin word for pride being superbia. Now obviously proud man is militating, fighting against both anthropos and Homo viator. Because if pride is the absence of humility, if you have pride, you do not have a sense of gratitude, you have a sense of cynicism. If you have a sense of cynicism, your eyes are not open in wonder. They're closed nihilistically. And if they're closed nihilistically, you're not moved to contemplation. You're moved to reductionism, reducing everything to basically nothing. And instead of dilation of your mind that's on the fullness of the real, you shut yourself away into your own shrinkled and shriveled, self-deified wreck. The god of your own pathetic and shrinking cosmos. You Gollum. Proud man, Homo superbus, Gollumizes himself. But also, Homo superbus refuses the journey. Can we remember how well is your knowledge of The Hobbit here? Right at the beginning, opening paragraph. What defines a hobbit hole? In one word. Comfort. Okay. What defines a hobbit hole is comfort. A hobbit hole is our comfort zone, where we feel comfortable. Bilbo and Frodo Baggins don't want to go on the journey, on the pilgrimage, on the quest, because it promises to be uncomfortable. G.K. Chesterton says, an adventure is an inconvenience rightly considered. You can turn that around and say that an inconvenience is an adventure wrongly considered. We have to embrace the inconvenience. We have to embrace the cross. We have to embrace the discomfort. We have to embrace the danger of leaving our own comfort zone. taking up the cross, meeting dragons, slaying them or being slain by them. Because that's the only way you fulfill the quest to get to heaven. Not by hiding yourself away in your comfort zone, but by going out fearlessly, be not afraid, into the world. But not with the world in mind, except to convert it, to take it with you to heaven. So Homo superbus refuses to look up and refuses the journey. Now, the thing is that we are both, or both three, we are all three. Insofar as with the Imago Dei, we made in the image of God, we are anthropos. We do seek to be one with him. We do look up in wonder, seeking him. Our hearts are restless until we find him. Insofar as we desire that unity with them, we are called to take up our cross and follow him to Golgotha, because it's the only way to get to the resurrection. But we're also Homo superbus. We want to do our own thing. We want to go our own way, or not go anywhere at all. Stay where we are. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that the battle between good and evil takes place in each individual human heart. That's the civil war in each of us between the anthropos and the homo viator, which we're called to be, and the homo superbus who refuses to be it. Right, another Latin phrase. Quo vadis. Right, so who is man? Who are we? Where are we going? Well, if you know the legend behind Quo vadis is that St. Peter, not for the first time, is running away. And it's because things are getting hot in Rome. They're putting Christians to death. And St. Peter thinks, I'm out of here. So he leaves Rome. And as he's leaving Rome, he has a vision of Christ marching towards Rome, carrying his cross on his back. And St. Peter says, Quo vadis? Where are you going? Christ says, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again. And St. Peter turns around and returns to Rome. Where are we going? Well, we are going to be crucified. Where are we going? We are going to die. It's cheerful, this talk, isn't it? How does Tolkien define men in The Lord of the Rings? 9 for mortal men doomed to die. That's our line in the poem. That's what defines us. I don't know of any poem in the English language where the word death is mentioned as many times. 9 for mortal, death, men, death, doomed, death, die, death. 4 mentions of the word death in one line. We are mortal men doomed to die. Which is why all great art, visual art, literature, contains another Latin phrase, the memento mori, the reminder of death. Very, very briefly on a tangent, I can't resist. The graveyard scene in Hamlet, it's probably the longest memento mori that, well, I don't know, maybe the whole of the Divine Comedy is a memento mori. But there's this long graveyard scene. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, when Hamlet's looking at the skull of the dead jester whom he knew and had kissed, and this is the memento mori. Traditionally, a skull is used as a reminder of death. St. John Fisher kept a skull by him all the time as a reminder of death. That poem, that scene, by the way, in Hamlet, I write about this somewhere else, is a dialogue, a tribute to a poem by St. Robert Southwell called Upon the Image of Death.
and St. Robert Salt was a Jesuit who would be martyred and whom Shakespeare almost certainly knew. So the memento mori, reminder of death. Now the reminder of death for a Christian never reminds the Christian just of death. We're not Macbeth. We're not nihilists. We don't despair. A memento mori, reminder of death, reminds us of the four last things. The first of which is death. But after death, there's judgment for all of us, inescapable. And after judgment, there's either hell or heaven. Nowhere else. So memento mori is meant to remind us that our mortal life, because we are going to die, is a quest for heaven, where there is no death. So this battle between Homo Beato and Homo Superbus is ultimately the battle of the city of God against the city of man, mentioning St. Augustine again. Because the church, the largest part of the church, which is the mystical body of Jesus Christ, so in some sense, who is the man? Well, it's the mystical body of Jesus Christ as well as the physical body of Jesus Christ. The church triumphant is the largest part of the church. It's the part of the church that existed before time. It's part of the church that exists after time. Where all the angels and all the saints, both the canonized and the uncanonized saints, are. It's where we're called to be. But in order to get there, you have to spend time in the church militant. Church militant means the church of war. And everybody in the church militant, in other words, everybody who's mortal, that hasn't yet died, is meant to be a Miles Christe, a soldier of Christ. Because the whole of human history is the city of God, the church in time, the church militant, being besieged by the city of man. And in every generation, Homo Superbus has more political power than Homo Beato. J.R.R. Tolkien said that as a Christian, I see history as the long defeat, with only occasional glimpses of final victory. And Galadriel says in The Lord of the Rings that she and her husband Celeborn have fought the long defeat for ages of this world, with many fruitless victories. Now why is that? It's because this world is broken and fallen, and it's under the sway of the Lord of this world. He's not the Lord of heaven. And it means that because the fabric is fallen and broken, that's why there is a civil war between Homo Beato and Homo Superbus. It's also why evil always comes back like a fungus. On those occasions where Homo Beato triumphs over Homo Superbus in the world, Homo Superbus always comes back again, stronger than ever. The final victory is not in this world. There will not be a heaven on earth. And those who seek a heaven on earth are looking in the wrong place for heaven. Miles Christi are either the soldiers of Christ and the church militant, are either saints or at least those who are trying to be saints. And the weapons that we use are the weapons of faith, hope, and love. Ecce homo, the church militant, the soldiers of Christ, are scourged and crucified. The end of the world is nigh. I get even more gloom later. End of the world is nigh. But when's the end of the world? The end of the world is not the final apocalypse. Well, that is the end of the world. But the end of our world is when we die. And that's the only end of the world we need to worry about. It's not part. We're on active service for 80 years and 10, or thereabouts. Maybe less, maybe more. But once we get off the active service, we don't have to worry about the war afterwards. We know who finally wins. The church triumphant is finally triumphant. But we get to leave. And if we've been good and loyal servants, wielding the weapons of faith, hope and love, faithfully, hopefully, with charity, we will have that resurrection that leads to the church triumphant. You need to remember what C.S. Lewis is always telling us, and what Tolkien tells us also in Lord of the Rings, about the shadow. This is the Shadowlands. The real life hasn't begun yet. Now Lewis says we think about ghosts as they can pass through walls because they're less solid than we are. In some sense, less real than we are. That's the pagan way. If you read Homer or Sophocles or Virgil, when we die, we become mere shadows of our former selves, mere shades. That's why we can walk through walls, because we're really just shadows. But for the Christian, it's the opposite. And Lewis says, what if ghosts can walk through walls, not because they are less solid than we are, but because they're more solid than we are, and that therefore solid walls are like air to them. They're more real, not less real than we are. Reality is the presence of God. Here we only experience that reality through a glass darkly, in shadows. I want to finish with the way that C.S. Lewis finishes the Chronicles of Narnia. The end of the Chronicles of Narnia, like all good tragedies, like Hamlet. Everyone's dead. But everyone's dead, and they are in, obviously, the antechambers of heaven. And they are told the whole of your life in Narnia, all of your adventures in Narnia and the whole of your life in your own world, our world, was just like the cover and the title page. The real story hasn't begun yet. So now the real story begins, where it's a story that goes on forever, where every chapter is better than the one before. The reality is actually better than the most beautiful fairy story. Because in the most beautiful fairy story, people live happily ever after. If we take Lewis's mystical vision of heaven to be good, and I do, we don't just live happily ever after, we live happier and happier and happier ever after. Thank you. Remember the boss man is, but questions? And then you're all speechless. Well, I mean, basically, that nihilism is a really miserable place to be. It's a very small place to be. It's a very despairing and ultimately suicidal place to be. It's the culture of death. What we have to do, though, is to live a life that's a witness to what we believe. That ultimately, just being alive in the fullness of the word. People can see that the homo viator and anthropos, that the homo superbus in us is under control, shall we say. That we will be like candles in the dark. That we will be light in very, very dark places. In actual fact, that the darker things get, the more that holiness will shine forth. what sanctity will shine forth. The most beautiful thing in the world is someone who's trying to be and follow Jesus Christ. And even the most evil people can see that. People know that those who lay down their lives for someone else are good. Right? And let me give you an example as well, just the power of beauty. And how we have to use beauty. So for instance, someone just showed me a really ugly concrete church that was built. Thankfully these things are not going up very often these days, but you know, you pay witness to the beauty of the gospel by putting up an ugly concrete brutalist structure. What does that say? As opposed to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, for instance, or actually the Chancery Church. I mean, these are also witnesses to beauty. And I want to just tell a quick story. So, to illustrate what I'm trying to say here about the power of beauty. So, once upon a time, it's a short story, so it's okay, it'll be over in 3 minutes. Once upon a time, there was a rock. And it was a very beautiful rock. But nobody had ever seen it. Because this rock was under the ground. Under the ground for millions and millions of years. And nobody had ever seen it. And then, using the power of human creativity, technology, someone dug the rock up. Now it could be seen. Those with eyes, humble eyes, you could see with wonder and contemplation, noticed that the rock was actually quite a beautiful rock. And then someone came along and said, that's not a beautiful rock, that is the beautiful rock. And then they took the rock away. And they did things with the rock. And today, if you go to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and as you go through the main entrance, you turn immediately to your right to the first side chapel, you'll see Michelangelo's Pieta, with the Mother of God cradling her crucified Son. Everybody who sees that is praying in the most basic sense, even if they're atheists. Because to pray is to lift your heart and mind to God. And any authentic edification is lifting your mind and heart to God. Anyone can see that, even if they don't believe in God, can see a mother's love, an innocent man who's been killed, and how the innocent man has suffered and now the mother is suffering. Whether the person is an atheist, an agnostic, a Muslim, or a Jew, Catholic or Protestant. So you see here how you can witness the truth of the gospel through goodness, in other words, by living a life of sanctity, through truth, by using reason, but also through beauty. And the key thing is, we don't want, as Chester says, we don't want a church that will move with the world. We want a church that will move the world. We can only do that if we are authentically living the life of goodness, truth, and beauty. We have to be witnesses.
So one of the things you're talking about in your talk, you said that there's I don't know if I caught this right, but there is no victory on this side of eternity. So if that's the case, why fight at all?
Because we're fighting for eternity. But I didn't say victory. There's no final victory. This side of the grave. The final victory is won if we are united with Christ in heaven. Every single day we are struggling, right? That civil war that's inside every human heart taking place in our human heart, and that's not going to cease until we're finally healed, please God, which will be following our death. So the final victory we're fighting for is the final victory of Christ, which is in the church triumphant. When Christ came to earth, if you like, he set us the template for human history. First of all, the power of Caesar is going to be pitted against the power of Christ. That even within the church, those called by Christ, 8% will be traitors. And that Christ himself, and therefore those who are called to follow him, are taking up their own crosses, are going to suffer. So really, I think that the whole of human history is present in the gospel. And we have to live out the gospel by living out what Christ lived out in the gospel and not expect it to be anything different from that. But of course, I mean, we see all suffering in the light of the resurrection, which is the final victory. So there is a final victory, but it's the resurrection. It's not to be found on. There's not to be no heaven on earth. There can be various different shades of. I've attempted here 50 Shades of Grey. You know, if you don't know what that is, good. You're lucky. But basically, you know, in the fallen cosmos, there's always going to be this struggle between the brokenness of the fallenness and the desire to be at one with Christ. That's going to be a struggle. Every human life is a struggle. That struggle is finally won as and when and if, please God, we unite ourselves with Him by getting to heaven, by His grace and our cooperation with it. So there is a final victory, but it's not to be found this side of the grave.
So, I mean, the constant struggle isn't a defeatist approach to life, you know? I mean, 'cause you might have a little victory, but then later on, you know, there's going to be, you know, the rage of the enemy even stronger, and so what's the point of even doing battle?
Well, we can't do battle without the help of Jesus Christ, so we have to have the assistance of grace, and at the moment we think we can do it ourselves, we're already on the losing side.
No, that's what I mean. You might win a grace-fought battle, but...
Well, there's two ways of surrendering. There's surrendering to the will of God, which means taking up your cross, because that's the will of God. Or it's surrendering to the struggle, saying, what's the point of struggling, in which case I just won't bother, which means you'll become comfortable with your God and myself, and where you ring happily, but you won't be happy.
Yeah. Sounds like Father described the marriage.
Oh, yeah. Solid priest, I'm describing marriage.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I read some books by Dr. Viktor Frankl. If you're familiar with him, can you comment on some of the things that maybe he's local therapy, things like that?
No, I only know him by reputation, so I can't comment. Sorry. He's the one who was in Auschwitz, is he?
Yes.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Let me just say one thing, by the way, that was all meant to be very happy. And if you didn't get it, then I'm sorry, but maybe it was a bad talk, but it was meant to be happy. All right, God bless.